Welcome back. Welcome to the final session on Monday, the second day, sorry, Sunday. The future business of aging. So I'm joined again, as we started this morning, by Melissa Chan. And we're here to talk about what we call the future business of aging. Online we have three of the most exceptional people out. They're really extraordinary. They are a wise council. That's how I think of them. They are Gretchen Addy, and Gretchen I first came across when she worked for the design consultancy IDEO. She works as a strategy consultant. Mandy Solomon. Mandy's the CEO of Mentia. Hey, give us a wave. And the amazing Bianca Stern. So Bianca Stern is ED for Health Innovations at the Centre for Aging and Brain Health Innovation in Canada. And they're here to discuss trends that are emerging in aging and tech. And earlier in the day, we went across some of those trends. We touched on them, but the people we have on the call, and Melissa, I think are fantastic examples of how aging populations are changing the way that we do business, that we do work, and where we might be going.
Yeah. Hi again to the speakers online, and I mean, thanks for joining us. I'm excited to be joining today's session and having this discussion with you guys. Just to give you some context, earlier today we spoke about the things like the design process, what it means to go to market, you know, how do we tailor certain messaging, how do we build trust, how do we change the wrapper around technology to reach people, right? So I think ending with today's session where we talk about ingredients, you know, what are some of the critical ingredients to design for the arc of aging and brain health. I think we're just going to have a fantastic discussion.
So I really want to hand over to Gretchen, and then I'll jump in and go with the flow and see where we go to from here.
All right. Thank you, Melissa and Dominic. And greetings to everyone around the globe who's watching, from Bianca, Mandy, and myself. It's such a pleasure to be a part of this event. So we are going to take you through our creative brain thoughts on what we feel are some potentially critical ingredients in designing for the arc of aging and brain health. So think of it as food for thought at the end of a mind-expanding day, which I'm sure you've all had. And also it's few words, lots of stories, and some inspiring images. So I'm going to share my screen. And view full screen. All right, can everyone see that? Let's see.
No, not yet, for some reason.
Not yet?
We've had this, while you're doing that, we can talk
There we
a
go.
little bit. Oh, it's arriving. We've had this great conversation today, which you'll really appreciate, about the gap between the way the technology is talked about and what actually happens, and how we're starting to use it in you know, people are interfacing with it and using it in interesting ways. So you're getting there, Gretchen, I think. Yeah, that works perfectly.
Got it?
Got it.
All right, let me go back to the beginning. All right. So to kind of set the stage for what we want to share today, we also want to acknowledge that we are in a time of change when things all around us are shifting and challenging the status quo. And it's socially, politically, personally, on every level imaginable. And it's a lot to absorb. So how we turn the challenges of our time into opportunities is the question. And in our minds, it's about several things here. It's about being responsive, actually designing for extremes like dementia to really enable better solutions for everyone, for all. It's also about challenging assumptions about what it takes to develop these creative solutions, and to think differently and go deeper into trends, or go deeper than trends, business jargon and metrics, and then to value play and creativity in the development of opportunities and solutions. So we put our heads together, and with all of that in mind, these are the ingredients that we believe can help with these, turning these challenges into opportunities. And so they're a lot like ingredients in a recipe. They're suggestions, they're malleable, they overlap and they blend together, and hopefully they speak to you in a way that they did for us. They are definitely not the usual design principles or metrics, and we don't even think of them as trends either. So the plan is to talk a bit about each one of them, and then with Melissa and Dominic's help, engage all of you to build on them with your creative ideas. So we're going to go through flow, sensing, enablement, meaning, community, and intersection. And we'll get started. So the first ingredient is flow. And when we think about it in two ways. It is a mental state. It's a feeling of energized focus. It's full involvement and enjoyment in the process of an activity. But it's also potentially a process about removing obstacles to be in flow. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mandy to share some stories along with Bianca.
Hello, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here, and happy Sunday to all, wherever you are in the world. Or it could even be a Monday. I am very interested in the word flow. Flow to me has a couple of meanings, and Bianca will speak to the psychological elements of flow, but I'm very interested in the idea of flow in terms of informational flow. So if you are designing for example, an older population, which is my interest, we have to think about aged care as being one of the last bastions to have a sort of a digital renaissance, or to have a digital transformation. So health is the sort of outer shell, and aged care within that, and there are many barriers to creating that flow. So when I talk about flow, I mean informational flow. How do people transition from one caregiver to another, such that the individual who's receiving care has this continuity of information? And so we're really relying on direct care staff to have that understanding. And there are very few tools, and there's a great need for more intuitive tools that allow people to have that handover when they're not in a hospital setting. Because a lot of the direct care staff, yes, they're now increasingly using devices. They all have iPhones, and some of them have iPads, and they have nursing, quote unquote, nursing stations where they have a PC. But in this time of ubiquitous computing and the Internet of Things, how do we improve the flow so that care is really universally understood by everybody working at any given time on that floor? I'm leaving home care out of this for the moment. Another element of flow is this idea of, oh, it's time for an activity, or it's time for our recreation therapists or our lifestyle people to engage with our residents. And it's 11 a.m. So they've had breakfast, they've got dressed, they've had breakfast, and now it's time for lifestyle. And this is a very artificial way of helping people to find meaningful engagement throughout their day, that it happens in room 304 at 11 a.m. and then in the afternoon, there's nothing, for example. So how do we make those sorts of activities flow throughout the day? And that means, of course, that the tool that's being developed has to scale and be understood by people who aren't necessarily lifestyle therapists or OT, occupational therapists, or speech therapists, or psychologists, and people with a special skill set. but everybody who's working on that floor understands the tools that are needed, and they can be employed at any time. And so, of course, that can speak to a non-digital solution, but it does lend itself also to digital solutions. And with that, I'll leave it there. Over to you, Bianca.
Thank you, Mandy, and hello, everyone. Really great opportunity to participate in a rich discussion, hopefully. I think, Dominic, you mentioned it a little bit, but this idea of innovations as they evolve from inception to actual spread and scale, morph and evolve over time. And what we're doing here is just highlighting aspects that are really important to think about that actually can have the ability or potential to raise the value proposition and make the solution much more compelling. So in terms of flow, I wanted to bring you one example called Wellbe, which is actually both a resident engagement and a communication care coordination platform. It's a project that my center has been supporting, and by supporting, I mean, providing them with that kind of consultation around how to grow that value proposition, and where and how to spread it and scale it. But Wellbe is an interesting example because it takes flow from two different aspects: the flow of a resident's engagement in their daily life, in their setting, and the flow of work and the quality of life of staff, because both are mirror images. And the more one solves for both in a centralized space, the better. As adopting organizations that I work with, one of the biggest challenges for them is encountering many solutions, and often ones that don't integrate together. And the value of Wellbe is it has integrated patient monitoring for safety, patient or resident engagement in their daily life, with aspects of workload coordination, prioritization, and a variety of those things. So what it does is it becomes an effective collaboration program or platform that takes all the noise distracting nurses and puts them in one centralized, controllable place. In short, by being hyper diligent in making it easier to communicate and coordinate care, it helps to reduce the burnout among nurses, and in so doing, facilitates the flow. So Wellbe is a good solution for you to look at even further in terms of this sort of mutual benefit of flow of resident life and workflow.
So what we're going to do is use the recipe to help guide us. We're going to try and bring the flow into the room. We're going to try and move around the conversation in a different way than you might be used to. So we're going to continue to invite and ask questions throughout, and I can pick some of them up. But what already strikes me is that once you start to use different sorts of language, you use the language of a recipe, you use the language of flow for thinking about a system or a delivery, then actually you start to think in very different ways. So I'm just interested within this room, if there's anybody with any thoughts, it needn't be a question. We've got one down the front, so.
Thank you. I chair the Irish Hospice Foundation, and we've been doing a lot of work on people dying at home. And as soon as you talked about flow of communication, I immediately went, God, there is a solution to one of the problems, because at the moment the issue is that the care that is provided to people at home is coming from different groups, from different caregivers, and is disjointed. So I'm going away with the big aha in relation to that. So thank you very much for that.
That's very interesting, because earlier Bianca kind of broke it down for us, right? With flow, there's the operation side, which is more staff focused, and then there's also the end user, which are the residents or the clients. And in order for that value to happen, that value proposition to happen on both ends, I think that flow on both ends need to be sorted. I think oftentimes what we see is that maybe we are too focused on one side, say maybe the end user, and not enough on the operation side, the staff end. Yeah, so that was a great example of I think mirroring what Bianca had shared.
And also this idea of stepping past the duality. We're sitting with a train outside. It's an old technology. It works, but it's an old technology. We're talking about a way of working with people using different sorts of technologies and different sorts of tools. We've got a question up there, and then we might come back to the next recipe after the next question and the next response.
So I think this integration of flow, I think, is a great idea. The two different stakeholders, the people in nursing homes and the staff. I'm just wondering whether there's any evidence for when you do integrate flow like this, that staff retention is better, and that the wellness outcomes for people, living in the nursing homes are improved.
Maybe Bianca, Mandy, Gretchen, anyone would like to take this one?
I can add a comment. Coming from, my background is in rehab science and occupational therapy, and so for a long time, I've been looking at quality of life and quality of work life. And certainly there is evidence out there that when you look at both, you create better outcomes, both from job satisfaction and from resident well-being. And so that grew as, programs that were more relationship-centered and, in the broader scheme of things of caring for people. There's a lot of evidence that when you consider the full experience, you will have an impact on staff retention and the well-being of both residents and staff.
So I might chip in here as well, Bianca. We've certainly seen with my group and the work that we're doing, but there's plenty of other evidence as well, that flow implies knowledge flow. And the knowledge flow can be both, staff member to staff member, or family member with staff, home, resident or client. But flow also brings in this sense of equality, because I'm sharing with you and you're sharing with me. And when you have a system that enables someone who, for example, has dementia to flow, have a knowledge flow between the person that's care recipient and the care provider, you go from having a relationship that's really hierarchical to having a relationship that is more on a par, because I'm learning from you, you're learning from me, I'm learning from you, you're learning from me. And that, on any level, when you have that degree of communication flow, that improves the outcome. I mean, we only have to look at, to point a terrible example, you've got what's happening in Ukraine, and you've got a Russian government that's not listening. So of course you've got a terrible example of lack of informational flow. But if we take it down to, our little area which we're working in, which is how do you create flow between care recipient and care person? Same thing happens when you allow when the system amplifies that communication, you have flow, and the outcomes appreciate, as you go.
Thank you, Mandy and Bianca. I mean, I think we have 5 different ingredients. As we go through the different ingredients, there's going to be more questions popping up. Just looking at the time, I think we want to move into the next ingredient. So I'll pass the time over back to you guys online.
All right, so next ingredient for us is sensing. And this is a place where there are so many opportunities. Sensing is becoming aware of something via the senses, or the process of perceiving. And if you think about technology and how it's opening up so much for us around touch, virtual reality, facial recognition, and at the same time, how do you connect and value both real life and the virtual world? And this is also an ingredient that Mandy's very passionate about and is a big part of her work. So I'm going to let her take you a little deeper into it, and we'll try to speed up a bit so we can make sure we have plenty of time for questions.
Okay, well, look, I might just kick off by starting with this graphic that we've got there for you. So here we have a person with a very severe case of muscular dystrophy. It's a particular, muscular dystrophy having many different presentations, and this is a particularly complex one. And the person here, young man, has a lot of constraints on his body, as we can see. And when playing role-playing games in the virtual world, in terms of on massively multiplayer, on more pegs we call them, the person is able to create a persona in the world which is in an enabling character rather than a disabling character. And what's intriguing here is how he has created this persona using some of the sort of signifiers of his actual physical presentation, and sort of abstracted that or embellished that to create armor and a position of strength. And this persona is able to do all kinds of things. And one of the biggest things, apart from his magical superhero skills, is that he's accepted as being someone who is without disability. And so when I was doing research into this whole area, I came across people doing some ethnographic work I came across people who said, I feel more myself in the virtual world than I do in the actual world, because I'm not constrained by this sort of body bag that is really complicating my sense of self. So I thought that would be a good way to start discussion around this topic.
So I can bring it back.
Go ahead, sorry.
Go on, Bianca, you take it.
No, I was going to say, I can give you another story. I'm wondering, Mandy, if you want to sort of bring up the transactional object story, and then I can add to it.
Yeah. So here we see some objects, and there's a very sort of interesting evolution, is that the roboticist Hiroshi Ishiguro from Kyoto University, very, very famous, created robots that had absolute similarity to him and to him and his team. And people in the audience may be familiar with the uncanny valley idea, which is that the more you make a robot look like you, the less appealing it is to people, because it's kind of becomes spooky and icky, and looks a bit like a dead person. And we seem to have this DNA that stops us from accepting this highly realistic robot. And as he developed his work, he became more and more interested in amorphous objects, like you see in these the lower shot, where people are hugging what's called a hug V, and he developed it in his center exactly like all that work on robotics. He came to think that this was a more humanistic creation, and certainly it was something that people wanted to hold. And so we bring in terms of sensing, we bring in tactile elements. So of course this transactional object represents something that we know or have intuited or have experienced. So in aged care we see people interacting with furry animals that have animatronics. We see them very able to interact with virtual objects that are reminiscent of experiences that they've had. Paro is a robotic seal, for example. So, and you very often see the pleasure that people get from holding dolls and reenacting the role that they play as a parent or a caregiver in their earlier years. So transactional objects, technology that acts as a transactional object, and of course it can be very low tech, it can be a pet rock, for goodness sakes, but something that is able to be an object in place of an experience, feeling, or emotion, are really powerful.
So the other example I would bring in terms of sensing, that supports empathy is Embodied Labs. So Embodied Labs is an immersive training platform. It uses virtual reality, and its learners are healthcare providers, family members, and the idea is to put you in the shoes of the persons that you care for, and that feeling of deeply understanding their lived experience. And with that, it really is saying that real understanding of the people that you care for is not only about knowledge, it's about feeling. And this is the impact that Embodied Labs has had on caregivers, whether they're informal or formal, is this feeling of really being in the shoes of a person with dementia or with Parkinson's. What does it look like, feel like? How do they experience the frustration of their day-to-day engagement? And so sensing, again, like flow, are not, they are aspects of experience. They're aspects of human experience as we look at solutions and build them towards greater value for the individuals they're meant for.
Thanks. I mean,
So back to you, Dominic and Melissa.
Yeah, well, while we wait to see if the audience have any questions, I think it was really interesting the point that Mandy brought up around transactional objects, and in Japan, the dolls. I'm wondering, in terms of the cultural element when it comes to sensing, have you seen whether or not that differs? Like in Japan with those dolls, does that resonate the same with, say, a different population?
Yes, I know that they've used them very widely in Denmark, and if there are academically minded people in the audience, which I'm sure everyone's interested in looking at peer-reviewed papers, you'll find if you look up Hugvie, Hugvie, and then Denmark, you'll probably find those papers online. I should add that there's a little funny aspect to these creatures. They have pockets in their ears, and you can put a phone in there and speak to the person. So it's a way of simulating presence. Might seem a bit clunky. This is photos probably about 6 years old. By today's standard, it might seem a bit clunky, but that was also a big element, that you would be able to talk to the person in real time as they were hugging the object.
Thanks, Mandy.
Melissa, if I would add also that in my work with the different older adult communities, you know, when you're mentioning the cultural element, it's certainly something that we need to consider, because we were at the time getting their reaction on a social robot, and they got into a whole discussion, and this is a Canadian audience, of what it means to people looking at them using a social robot. Does it mean they couldn't make friends anymore? And so, you know, there are cultural implications. Even as different end users become more comfortable with technology, with robotics, there are still different cultural perceptions of, you know, of how one would use this, what it would mean, what would it imply? Yeah, I mean, I still discover it in conversations with different communities.
Thanks.
I'm trying to see if I've understood this properly. I have early stage Alzheimer's disease, so I have certain slightly odd cognitive problems. I can't see the color black. Black disappears. I have problems with number memory. And obviously people I know with other forms of dementia have their own particular cognitive difficulties. Am I understanding you correctly that we could be working towards being able to simulate my cognitive profile so that somebody else could go, oh, that's what you mean. That's why you can't make your suitcase work. Is that right? Because if so, that's wonderful.
That's basically yes. That's we can do simple answers. We don't need to do complicated ones. Go on, do you want to add to it?
So I will say that to Embodied Labs, the founder of Embodied Labs was drawn to create this because her mother was unable to see certain things on one side of her face, and so people couldn't work out what that meant in terms of caring for her. And so she created a sort of a kind of a clunky set of glasses which obstructed one side. And it was through that she started to think, well, if I could create a system whereby I could recreate the issues that this person is having and that others understand it, of course they'll just get it like that. And so, yes, I mean, what would be really cool, I don't know if Embodied Labs have been able to get there yet with their different offerings, is that you could plug in, you know, I can't see black, I can't read that number, and then have a personally delivered experience that people could share. I mean, I can't see technologically why that wouldn't.
Yes, there was a big yes in the room that you missed. I'm going to take a question from the room, but I'm also going to start to join at some dots. So we were talking earlier about the relationships between people with knowledge and people without knowledge, and how that first had to change so that people could be listened to. And therefore, then you could start to tailor and change the care. And what we're talking about here is if we change the language and the processes and the interactions, we get to a whole different place. Yes, the question from the room.
Hi, I just have a small question as to how did you guys come up with the idea that the robot should be in a form of a dolphin and not something else? Like, the robot could be some other animal, could have been some other, maybe whatever the person likes, or maybe depending upon a particular set of population. How did you guys come up with the idea of a dolphin only?
Well, we're not the developers, we're just giving examples of what other people have done, but I can speak to example Paro, which is a seal, or the animatronic objects, the dogs and cats that are very popular. We know that pet-assisted therapy is very impactful for people as they become more and more progressive with their dementia, and animals are often brought into the home, into a residential care environment to bring companionship, actual animals. But of course, that's not always practical, and particularly for people at home, how do they look after an animal? So it really is taking the idea of what happens actually, and how can we translate that, how can we scale that experience and have it so that it, you don't need to maintain this animal in the same way. Similarly with a baby, so it's all rooted in experience is the short answer.
We might go back to Gretchen and keep moving, I think. So,
Yes.
Gretchen, do you want to take the next? What's the next ingredient in your recipe?
The next ingredient is enablement. And as far as a definition there, we say it's the process of making someone able to do something or making something possible. And so for me, coming from a first career in architecture, I always think of enablement in the context of universal design and accessibility and in very tangible ways. But there is so much more to consider in both the real and virtual worlds today when you begin to think about enablement. And we've already shared some examples, but we have a couple more if we want to just quickly share those before we have a discussion about it. I'm going to turn it over to Bianca.
So enablement is fundamental.
So sorry, I
but
don't think we're
enablement,
seeing the slides, so if you can have that up.
Oh.
Thank you. Thanks.
So as I said, enablement is fundamental, but enablement is actually much harder to actualize than just merely providing the ability or accessibility to someone, because you need to enable in an intuitive way. And one needs to enable in a way that destigmatizes, because end users, those individuals that need to be enabled, also need to feel that it blends into their life and it doesn't stigmatize them. Certainly, as the world emerges in terms of all technology solutions, enablement from the perspective of digital equity and digital literacy becomes very important. And then this idea of intuitive also means that enablement should be responsive. When we're creating environments that all can access, in terms of the principles of universal design, we're creating an environment that enables all at different levels of the game. Certainly, technology is a tool and an enabler. And we have many examples of this, and certainly, as we've been talking, you've heard some of them. But Lingo is one project that actually was developed by a speech and language pathologist based on experiences with her clients. And it is a tool that builds on the already available devices out there that are called alternative and augmentative devices. In this case, it is a platform that allows for people to communicate, whether it is that it gives them the language or facilitates their speech or helps them to develop a conversation or builds their literacy. And so it's a tool that is user-friendly. It is accessible to a number of different audiences. It looks like a sort of a game, but it is enabling functional communication. Mandy, maybe you can tell us about Emito.
Yes, this is a Canadian company, and Bianca being from Canada, I thought I'd do a shout out to all our Canadians in the audience today. Novolte is really just it's a plug-in that allows the wheelchair to become, people can completely control a smart environment from their wheelchair. And that's not always about going to a smartphone and tapping on Google Hub or something like that, because if you don't have that facility, how do you do that? So this is just really designed as a way for people to make their wheelchairs, and we're seeing this in lots of companies, but I thought I'd highlight Novolte to be, that's the control center. And the user interface is such that you don't need to use digits in order, fingers, in order to make that control.
Thanks for those examples. I mean, with Enablement, earlier this afternoon, we had someone from the audience that talked about broadband access, right? In the area of digital divide and broadband access, when we talk about enablement, there's so much need to take into account that community or end users' needs and experiences and design from there. So we're going to point it to the audience. Any questions online or in the room?
I had a question about, is there any study done between the benefits of a doll, as in a traditional doll that you can dress, and a virtual doll? I know my own mother had Alzheimer's disease, and in the later stage of her disease, she really liked dressing and undressing dolls and putting them to sleep. And she knew they were dolls, they weren't babies, but she liked the whole mechanic of doing it, and it was very soothing for her. Is there any research you've done between the difference between a doll, as a traditional one, and this virtual doll that you can't dress because it's just a shape?
You mean the Hugvy, that
Yes.
amorphous creature?
Yes.
Or are you thinking more about traditional dolls?
No, the creature, the seal creature.
Yeah. Oh, Paro. That's the batting eyelid seal. Look, there is a lot of evidence. There's a particular Australian academic whose name, she's Wendy, and I can't think of her surname, but I'm very, very happy to share this with you, who's done a lot of study on the difference between using the Paro, the harp seal, the animatronic pets, and real animals. And those studies are readily accessible. I can find them and maybe post them on chat while we're talking. But yes, if you check Wendy, I'm a great believer in Google, Wendy, Queensland University, and Paro, P-A-R-O, those studies will come up.
If I also can add that your question also draws a distinction between something that's physical, touchable, tangible, that people seek, versus this new experience that's not as tangible and requires a little more interaction to engage with. So potentially your mother loved the feel of and the action of changing clothing. And, you know, some individuals love the feel of Paro because it's a white fur. Paro looks at you and flutters their eyes. So it's very there in terms of the experience versus the virtual ones that tend to be more triggers of reminiscence or triggers of long-term memories. So you can't almost compare them. They're different kinds of experiences. I would say that it would depend also on individuals. For some, the triggers of memories of pets or dolls or what they used to do can be engaging in a different way. But they're a different way than if I had Paro on my lap and feeling the fur and touching and hugging it. In both cases, they're very valuable experiences. And I wouldn't go with one or the other. It's almost like, it depends on the person and what you're seeing and seeing them respond to it for the customized experience.
So Gretchen, we might come to you for the next part of this recipe. We might come to you for meaning. It wouldn't be the first time I came to you looking for meaning, I think.
Yeah, meaning is a word that is very personal and elusive at times, but nonetheless really important. And it's kind of right up there with purpose, which we hear a lot about currently. A lot of talk about both of these words. And yeah, I think for us, I'm going to let Mandy share some things in respect to it, but it is so much about a lot of the things we're talking about your relationship with something, your experience with it, how you receive it, its presence in your life, and it can be everything from an action to an object to a role. But I'm going to let Mandy build on that.
Well, this really goes back to our previous questioner who asked about the meaning of Paro versus an amorphous object. We're constantly in the process as humans of meaning making in everything we do. And a lot of the natural inclination is to say, oh, how do I make meaning with you? Because we're both humans and we communicate, but we need to remember that we make meaning not just in interaction in relationships, but our relationships with everything around us. So my relationship to an object that was on the mantelpiece, and my relationship to the street that I live in and the community around me. So when we look at technology that helps to build meaning, we really need to think beyond person to person, but the wider experience we have with our environment and what role that plays in our lives.
So one good example of a story that brought in this co-design element and created meaning for this solution is a platform called Sunshine Connected, which is an intergenerational matching service that connects university students with older adults. This began as a student project because the university students want to do something to help out during COVID with this growing social isolation. They came to one of my community panels and said, well, what if we did this? And they started talking back and forth with the older adults, and the older adults actually suggested, well, what if instead of just sharing your skills, because that's what they wanted to do, they suggested they share theirs as well. So this grew into the Teach and Trade program, where together the older adults felt a more meaningful role for them would be that they have wisdom, skills that they could share, and university students felt the same way. And so now they're in this stage where they're building the prototype together and to determine how does this work, how might we create that relationship, and what might Teach and Trade look like. Meaning making is really part of that process and increased the value proposition of the solution. And that was, something that came together with both generations.
So we'll get back to you, Dominic and Melissa.
Thank you. Okay, any questions from the room?
Thoughts and additions? Twitching up the back. It's really extraordinary, the things that are coming through this. Meaning making is a huge part of art making, it always has been. We were talking about the polarization of arts and science earlier in the day, but we've gone way past that over here, I think. But the idea that you're meaning making with objects that, not just between each other, so an interpersonal, an intrapersonal, but then also between rocks and trees. To go back to your transitional objects, like we make ourselves in the environment that we're in, we make sense of the world. Tomorrow we'll be talking about the neuroscience of that, how we make up consciousness. But it also touches on something that will come up later in the week. So there is a project here which is part of the hospice movement, which has been trying to work out how do we process the pandemic? How do we work through the end of the pandemic? What's the transition out of the pandemic? And that's all about how do people transition grief? How do they make sense at that point in their lives where everything is disrupted, where the world makes no sense, where things have radically changed? And believe it or not, there is pet rocks involved in that project. So we might come back to that one on Wednesday.
I think we have a question.
Asking a question about this making of meaning, and I'm thinking of particularly people living with dementia. So it can be very difficult for physicians, healthcare professionals, and even, I suppose, family caregivers understanding the meaning that a person with dementia is making. But the person with dementia is making meaning. So I'm just wondering about the technology or the solutions, or any ideas that you might have to help us all understand what the person living with dementia is, their actions, how it's making meaning for themselves. And maybe it goes back to this flow, this communication flow. But I'm just trying to think about, just like Dominic, I'm learning from Dominic about trying to join up some ideas here. But if we could understand the making of meaning, I think that, and that communication, it would be wonderful. I guess it's actually having more information, if you're a former caregiver, about the person living with dementia, so you can actually make that meaning. But I wonder, is there a technology or technological solution or support that you could offer us?
It's interesting that you jump to technology, because I would say that, one of the assumptions we need to break is that people with dementia are also human beings that continue to make meaning. And so, before anything, it's this idea of listening and being with, understanding, observing how they respond to things, what they choose to do. Because even at their changing cognitive capacity, they don't stop making meaning. And I actually, Dominic, I agree with you. Arts-based tools are amazing vehicles for opening up into the soul of individuals and really giving them that opportunity to make meaning in different ways. So, whether it's visual arts or even an example like Time Slips, which is a program that's aimed at moderate to severe people that have moderate to severe dementia. Having said that, then again, like we said, technology can be a tool, but technology isn't a magic solution. I would always start with the human connection.
Talking of human connection, we have another question in the room, if we can take it, and then we might go to the next recipe.
Just to say, is that working?
It's fine, yeah, it's fine.
Just to say quickly, I love the idea of the recipe and the ingredients. Every time a new ingredient came up, I thought, wow, that sounds right. I'm just wondering what the journey would be like if actually it had started at meaning and worked towards flow. Would the outcome be the same or radically different?
Yeah, it's a very good question. We labored over sort of how to create the order of them, because they overlap with each other so much. we wouldn't see them as being prescribed in that order by any means, that they are really very much ingredients, and depending upon what you're doing, some may rise more so than others.
Next recipe, next element.
Next ingredient.
Next
All right.
ingredient.
So I might suggest that we cover the next two ingredients together, and then we do
Okay.
a question with, open up to the floor for questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go through this quickly. So community, this feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, values, or goals. And when we thought about community, we had a lot of stories to tell because all of us are involved in different communities. I'm going to let Bianca lead off here a bit, and then I'll share a story as well.
So community as an incubator for solutions, as a generator, an amplifier, community can be a really powerful ingredient. One of the community, stories to share with you is AgeFriendly Ireland. This is a group that has taken such a transformative approach to addressing aging at home across Ireland. Ireland is made up of 31 counties. A lot of older adults are aging in place in rural settings. The value of community here is a group that has actually harnessed the collaboration of government at different levels, of local resources from the community grocery store to the library, of creating connections between citizens and community leaders, of pulling out community strengths. And so it has resulted in some very significant and transformative outcomes that are more grassroots and much broader in terms of broader community and society types of changes, from parks that are made more user-friendly with older adult exercise areas to local mailmen knocking at the door of Mrs. X to just check in and see how she's doing today. It's a really it's a role model, I think, for other countries in terms of the power of community.
And village movement as well. I mean, I started volunteering probably 10 years ago with the local San Francisco village, and I've kind of watched the evolution of it as a grassroots effort that did start out providing social care services for older adults so that they could age in place. But what it has now become and evolved into, it's grown its community into being an intergenerational organization of members and volunteers that kind of support and inspire each other. And they are even now working with startups and civic organizations to pilot new programs of support and learning. And they are becoming activists in their own community. So it's kind of taken this sort of snowball evolution effect and become much more than sort of its initial goal. All right, we're going to move into the next ingredient, the last one, to keep us going here. So the last one is intersection. And this one is a bit different. And we like to think about it in the sense of points of commonality intended or discovered that result in new opportunities. I used to call it, when I was working in design, mashups. But it is this kind of intentional jamming together that results in new opportunities, and kind of thinking about, you know, what if you mixed X with Y and got an even stronger value proposition for a business or service as a result of that. And it's kind of hard to explain exactly. So we've got some really great examples of these kind of intersections and mashups that have happened. And we'll take them through you really quickly, and then we'll have a conversation again. So I'm going to let Mandy start off.
Oh, well, this is, I want to talk about my company, Mentia, where we've combined caregiving, gaming, science, and virtual worlds to create a meaning-making experience. And this is, I'm so glad the gentleman brought this up earlier, because all my research and also life as a Silicon Valley software developer has been about how do we create meaning between people who who have this shrinking world and are more and more disabled from expressing the sense of self, which is critical to all of us. How do we use technology to help them to create meaning? And so you'll see in the background behind me, this is just one of the environments in our virtual world, which we call Diva World. We have a garden, we have a sitting room, we have a bedroom, we have a barn, and we're just at the moment working on a bathroom whereby people can experience and rehearse activities of self-care inside the bathroom. So the idea is it's played by two people, the participant and the, well, we call one the supporter and one the player. And that's typically caregiver and care recipient. And the idea is that everything in this world has multiple meanings. So if I tap on the cat, for example, there, and I'm a vet in a previous time in my life, my relationship to that animal is very different to someone who hates cats. And so it's up to the participant, up to the supporter to help that person express their reaction to these objects, and through that come to a deeper understanding. And so it's got mini games, it's got many objects that relate to different cultural elements of life. And this is a constantly expanding world built on a game engine where we can start to create diverse experiences, avatars that speak different languages, artifacts that hold different meaning. And the whole purpose is about helping that person to amplify this shrinking sense of self, whether it be through language or whether it be simply by tapping on objects and having responses to that. So yeah, that's one element of one aspect, very personal aspect around the concept of intersection.
To take it to a different example, one that's closer to my heart, is LEAP, the Lived Experiences Advisory Panel, grown from where we started at CABI. So knowing that intersection breeds innovation. And so, as CABI, the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, we've always worked with older adults, a small group of them, as, advisors, as end user feedback for innovators. But as we grew the center, we realized that we needed to expand the diversity and reach of older adults to get a broader end user community to inform innovation. We also realized that these older adults would need more coaching and mentoring to support them to be active members of the innovation community. And we realized that technology needed to be part of the process, and that older adults really thrived in and could benefit from community. And so those became the critical elements that supported the growth of LEAP, which, as I said, originally stood for Lived Experiences Advisory Panel, but the older adults said to me, stop calling about that, because it's not about lived, we're living. So use LEAP as a point of, we're leaping forward, we're a community of purpose. And that's what drives it right now, in terms of a community of communities where life experience meets innovation, and we're continually intersecting the idea of innovation technology with storytelling, arts-informed vehicles to expand the understanding of problem framing, opportunities for co-design. So by continually intersecting these critical elements, this is what's growing LEAP and keeping it thriving.
So we have two other examples. I'm going to talk around one of them specifically, but I encourage everyone, if you don't know about Sanofi, to look it up, because they have two programs, Sanofi Care and Sanofi Med. And it's been a great intersection of well-being, VR, and medical diagnostics. The other example I will talk a little bit to, which is PAPA. And it's a national network of PAPA Pals. It provides social support and everyday assistance for elder care, child care, self-care. So it's basically family on demand. And the focus is very much on social determinants of health. And so that can be loneliness and isolation, transportation access, technology, healthcare literacy, and a lot more. And what they have done is they have sort of created an intersection at the enterprise level, and they're providing benefits to members in programs that are offered through health plans, employers, health systems, and also creating intersections and partnerships with organizations like Uber Health for transportation. So they're really leveraging what started out as a very sort of simple offering to be able to expand it and grow their audience and grow their network and who they're intersecting with and who they're partnering with. So I'm going to go back, Dominic and Melissa, to all of our ingredients just to put them up on the screen. And we can have some more discussion, but we certainly hope that we've kind of opened your brains up at the end of this amazing day with our ingredients, and encourage you to think about different recipes for your own challenges and opportunities that you're developing.
Thanks so much, Gretchen, Mandy, and Bianca. I mean, I think when you showcase all of the ingredients, one of the questions that popped up in my head was, are they all equal when it comes down to designing? Do you place equal weightage on each of them? Would you prioritize one or two of them more than the others?
I would say all of the words are, there's so much bleeding from one end to the other. There's not, try not to think of them as compartments, but just this sort of atmosphere. And where one stops, another takes over. It's kind of an improvisation how you choose to use them, knowing that flow can also be, part of another of the ingredients. They can, or, each can be a singular, but they can be part of each other. It really is not prescribed, in my view.
And I might add on to that as well and come back to a question that we had before we take another question, which is, somebody asked before, if you change the sequence, would you change the outcome? Would you change the process? But this is a recipe. So sure, all recipes are made out of the same basic ingredients. The way that you use them partly depends on where you are. So what's the asset that you can build with? What's accessible to you? Where can you start first? And then what do you need to concentrate on? What's the most important thing for you to do? Gretchen.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that a little bit too, in the sense that one other way to think about this is like any recipe. If you leave an ingredient out, how much impact will it have? And I would say if someone is using these to think about something that they're creating or designing, is that if you're not able to connect or embody a good percentage of these, then maybe you have to sort of rethink the direction or the solution that you're creating. So I don't think any one of them holds any more weight, particularly because they all overlap so much. But it is certainly good to look at them holistically and look at what you're developing and see, am I really responding to these as in totality, or am I missing something?
We might do a
I would also add that it's about challenging you in some ways to open your minds to diverge through these. No, you know, quantifying them only constrains you. This is more of an invitation to look at them and consider them at different at different times in the cycle of evolving a solution. More to, you know, to challenge you to break traditional patterns of thinking where we know certain things we're always, you know, trying to land on, and introduce these, which we, like we said, are more amorphous, more about the experience, more about the intersection with the human being. And by doing that, you're expanding your thinking around your solution.
It also talks to the life cycle of a company. It talks to the life cycle of an individual. It talks to this movement from receiving care to giving care, or giving care to receiving care. We'll take one question from the audience, and then we might be nearly at time.
One question here from one of our online attendees, so thank you very much. So this is a specific question about simulator usage, if any of you have any knowledge of using simulators. So the person gave the example of bus drivers developed a simulator for older persons living in a care home using the scenes around Dublin. So they're just inquiring if you have any knowledge, or do you think that might be something that you would use?
I can give you an example. Oh, go ahead, Mandy.
Yeah, Google Maps has been very well utilised in different ways, embedded into different things. For example, travelling down your street while you're on a cycle and you have a screen around you, and you have the sense that you're actually driving down, you know, you're on a stationary bike, but you're seeing routes that you love and know, as an example. Or similarly in recreational situations, you know, you have a group of people who are looking at Google Maps, and one person's being able to show the house that they grew up in, and that's hugely empowering for that person to share that, but also for others to understand more about that person. So it can become a group discussion. They're just two quick examples.
Yeah, I've seen over the last maybe even 15, 20 years, a growth of this whole idea. Certainly technology has, you know, improved over time from the original green screens to what is possible now virtually and augmented reality ways. But the idea of simulation is a very powerful tool for training, for education. We use it in a variety of ways, from, believe it or not, a non-tech solution altogether by using what we call simulated patients in clinical environments where teams get to practice with individuals who are actors and go through a scenario. So this idea of simulating a care assessment or that kind of thing. And there are a variety of simulation tools in education for lots of different disciplines. But it's certainly, and we do a lot of improv and role playing and forum theater type things to simulate particular social situations or clinical situations. So it's a very interesting tool. The technology has created many more rich options to utilize.
Sarah, have we got another question online, or we kind of, as we're around, yeah?
No, I just wanted to add on that question earlier around simulation and activity, right? So in one of the long-term care facilities that I visited, it's a combination of offline and online. So the online is a simulation, the offline is the environment. So they are actually walking on treadmills, but they've covered the site. So it doesn't look like you're on a treadmill. It looks like you're on ground with bricks on the side, and then you're looking at a screen with the simulation. So I think there's a strong need to combine the online, offline components, taking into consideration how the environment feels like when it comes down to designing these solutions.
So this is one of my, I mean, you are my favorite group of people really for, if I wanted a conversation, you're my favorite ingredients. Melissa as well. I'm just going to come back to you one last time and go around the houses. If there's anything else you want to kind of add in, any final spice for this thing that we've cooked up, and I might go to Bianca and then Mandy and then back to Gretchen to wrap us up.
I don't know, guess I think just to play, going back to this idea of, look at your solution. Don't hold it so tightly to yourself. Give yourself the opportunity to think of many different pathways to increase the value of the solution. And you do that through some of these critical ingredients we talked about today.
It's something that I think could be really useful for innovators in the room and in our session today is to look at those ingredients, and of course you're listening to your customer or your client all the time, and the best solutions are ones that solve a problem. So you could in fact use those ingredients and use them as, you talk to your client, let's just say it's a big nursing home corporation, and you throw them those words and see what meanings they make of them. And maybe that can help you also start to have a focused conversation about the sort of solution that you have in mind.
Yeah, I would just build on something Bianca was talking about as well, in terms of this idea of valuing play and creativity and thinking differently and challenging assumptions, which was one of our first slides of, we've sort of challenged and taken on kind of a new approach as opposed to trends and other kinds of things. And we're doing it just to stimulate and get you to begin to challenge your own assumptions and to think differently, and use play and creativity in ways that can open up new opportunities or even solve old problems in new ways. And so, yeah, for me, it's just really getting outside of that comfort zone and the way that things are usually done, and thinking about them, whatever frame you choose. You can use our ingredients or someone else's, but I think, yeah, just opening up the brain power and the mind of, as you're solving or developing something.
So I'm going to bring it to a close. I'd like to thank Bianca Stern, Andy Solomon, Gretchen Addy, and Melissa Chan. It's been a pleasure cooking the new company.